guys, welcome back to the newest episode of Heavy Metal Music Theory. This episode was inspired by a viewer's comment. His name is Chris. Chris, you know who you are. Thank you again. He said, can you do a video on songwriting tips for the metal genre? So basically what we're going to do here is I'm going to explain from my perspective, because I don't know everything, but I'm going to give you my perspective on how metal and music theory kind of work together, and then I'm going to give you my take on how I would approach writing metal songs. Okay? So first let's get into what heavy metal music theory is. It's the basis for my channel. My channel used to actually be called Heavy Metal Music Theory, and I changed it to Everything Music Theory because I thought it fit the everything that I do on here: jazz, pop, rock, blues, multiple instruments. So I thought the everything was a better name for the channel. Styles like classical music and jazz and even pop subscribe more to traditional music theory templates than, say, heavy metal. Heavy metal is kind of, in a lot of ways, and I'm a huge metal advocate, obviously, but in a lot of ways it's kind of the outcast version of music. You know, the jazz is super high quality, top tier stuff. They make use of every possible thing you could ever imagine with complex chords and movements and modulations. And then you have classical, which is kind of middle of the road, where they're doing modulations, but they're not as dangerous as the jazz stuff. And even pop music will follow traditional theory rules and use a very simple, almost in most cases too simple, roadmap for songwriting, where they're basically stuck in one key and they never leave. And that's boring. All right? So, but heavy metal has always been kind of the oddball, because the nature of heavy metal requires guitars tuned either to standard or lower. They're heavy, we have distortion, we have effects, it's loud. It's hard to play big guitar chords when you're detuned and heavy on distortion. So a lot of what metal has kind of evolved to be is much more of, in some ways it's a simplified version of traditional music theory. Instead of doing full chords that might contain 4 or 5 notes, they're now doing chords that are either just a power chord, which is 2 notes, or occasionally there'll be a 3rd note, whether it's the octave or whether it's a 9th, whatever it happens to be. Things have been greatly diminished, no pun intended, and also simplified to equate for the muddiness of the sound, right? You're not going to play a 13 sharp 11 chord with heavy distortion. It's just not going to work. And a lot of what metal is also, it's kind of like pop music on steroids, because a lot of metal revolves around the vocal melody, right? The vocal melody is a huge part of what makes the metal song great. That's why singers will get such gruff for being terrible, if they're terrible. So let's move on here. From the perspective of guitar, if you were just playing guitar and you wanted to think of writing a metal song or a metal riff, you don't want to think in terms of one diatonic key, because the chances are you're not going to stick in that key anyway. A lot of the guys in metal, it's kind of hard to tell if they decided to kind of reinvent the wheel by completely avoiding diatonic music theory traditions, or if it's just lack of knowledge that has helped create some of these things. Obviously, hallmarks of the heavy metal sound would be things like the minor 3rd interval, the power chord, and of course the tritone. All right, those 3 intervals, minor, perfect 5th, and flat 5 or a tritone, those are hallmarks of the heavy metal sound. And so a lot of what metal is just simply picking a root note. In most cases it's E, and then doing something after the root note, whether it's power chords, or whether it's like, Enter Sandman, single note phrases that include the tritone, by the way, and just repeat over and over and over, and they become the basis for songs. So in traditional styles of music like pop, classical, and jazz, you will have chord progressions, and those chords will generally be on repeat, and there will be a melody throughout. But in metal, it's more about the riff, right? The riff is essentially a phrase that one plays on guitar that repeats. And for the most part, the riff won't contain any chords other than power chords as a rule. So if you take Enter Sandman, single note runs. If you do something like that, where you're doing power chords or what I call power chord variations, and we'll get into that, then you're essentially playing a riff. All right, so let's say you don't know any traditional theory, all right, and it's just you and a guitar. You love metal and rock. You have no theory knowledge. You just love guitar. How are you going to start writing music? Well, pick a key, and by key I really mean, in a simplified way, pick a root note. And in the case of Metallica, a lot of the time, it's just E, right? And we'll imply an E minor, even though it's just a power chord. And then you could take the notes of E minor, linearly up the neck, and you could use those as a means for the basis for a song. So you could go like... Now that implies that you have a basic knowledge of what a scale is, using the E minor scale as the basis for the chords, in this case power chords, used with distortion for that metal sound. And you can do that all day long. You can come up with all kinds of crazy things. But the cool thing about metal is that, like I said, are they reinventing the wheel? Do they know something we don't? Or are they just ignorant and they're just like, well, I'm in a metal band, I'm going to crush a beer can on my head, and we're just going to riff, right? Take Master of Puppets. Master of Puppets is essentially using every note in music. It's right? Chromaticism, downward, with the open E chugs in between to tell the ear, hey, we're in E. Doesn't really matter what E we're in, because if you're using the chromatic scale, you're not in E major, you're also not in E minor, you're just E chromatic, right? You're just using all the notes. But the reason that we're grounded in E is because we have that open E chug every other note between those power chords or those single notes. And again, power chord, single note doesn't matter. The really cool thing about the power chord is that it doesn't contain a third. So it's ambiguous, right? It's just a single root note and the fifth of the scale played together. Now, if you were going to do like a minor interval, then that would give you a minor sound. If you're going to do a major interval, that would give you a major sound. But that root fifth literally has no identifying quality as to whether it's major or minor. It's neither. And therefore, it is the perfect chord for people who don't know what they're doing. Now, I'm not bashing metal guys, because bands like Queensryche and Dream Theater, although I believe Dream Theater are theory experts, at least Petrucci and Rudess and Mayung. But, a lot of guys, in order to play metal, you have to simplify your notes because you have distortion. So I'm just talking like I did in the beginning of this video. The bottom line is, if you know nothing and you want to learn how to riff, just pick the open E, and that'll be your foundation. We could call it a pedal tone. You're going to throw in other chords and other notes after. So let's just say you want to do let's just say you've seen other people use the open 2, 3, and 5 off string 6. You could come up with stuff on that. You could do single notes like single notes into power chords, vice versa. You could even do, you know, individual notes between the root and 5th. Million possibilities out there. What you do with it is up to you. So just to clarify, before I get into like the meat of this, which is how I would approach writing metal, let's just assume you know nothing about music theory and you have a guitar and you have distortion, you have a liking for metal. What you can do is just create power chords, build the power chord off 5/7, and use the open 6 string as a pedal tone. Pretty basic. That's like the Iron Maiden cadence right there. It's like a 1-6-7 or 1-7-6 in E minor with the open chugs with more of a Metallica type rhythm. So that's one thing you can do. Going with the fretted, the dotted frets rather, is a great way to keep yourself grounded, right? Because if you go like actually, that sounds pretty cool. See, this is why metal, it's almost like throw out all the rules and then maybe come back and learn all the rules and then throw them back out again. It really doesn't matter what you do as long as you can keep time and you have feel. And if you're really into a specific style of metal, try to go for that in terms of your chugging and how you're picking. It really just comes down to what sounds good. There are so many examples, Master of Puppets being the one that came to mind, where we're not even in a major or a minor key. We're using every note that exists on the guitar, essentially, and you can't quantify that or qualify that as being in a specific key. So whether you know music theory or not, if you're playing metal, go with your gut. Now, with that said, I just want to go through what I like to call power chord variations. The band Queensryche is probably one of the more well-known bands that would do stuff like this, what I'm about to show you. And I'm not going to play any Queensryche here for you. I'm actually just going to give you what I call power chord variations. And essentially it's where I'm blending the power chord idea, which is just 2 notes at a time, with a study of intervals, right? And this, you don't have to be a rocket science. Don't get scared about the word intervals. You're going to take your power chord, which is root and 5, right? If you bring your pinky up by 1 fret, you get that sound. We're going to call that the sharp 5. If you bring your middle into the equation but remove the other 2 fingers, that's what you call the tritone. If you do a little stacked figure here, you get what's called the perfect 4th. And then if you do this little number here, you get the major 3rd. And then if you do this one, you get the minor 3rd. Okay? Now the reason I'm bringing all this up is because you can use these in your riff creation. So here's one thing you can do. You can start off with root and 5th. Bring up the sharp 5. Back to the, so here's the 5, sharp 5, 5, tritone. All right, then you could also take that same idea and bring it down by a whole step or 2 frets. That way you're recycling. Anytime you can recycle an idea to keep yourself from having to think up something completely new, all you got to do is just move to a different location on the neck, provided you're staying, somewhat diatonically correct. I went from E to D, so we'll assume E minor. I was doing the 5, sharp 5, 5, flat 5, and then moved it down a full step to D. So still riding that E minor diatonic line. And of course, you can do this all day. You can come up with any combination of sounds from those intervals. Another one I like to do is in fact, let's do Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. Okay, Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. Forget what key we're in. I'm going to do it from E. I think they might be in D for this, but we essentially have the root, the major third, the root, the perfect fourth, the root, and the perfect fifth. So that is a perfect example of what I'm telling you you can do, and it's already a done song, right? Everyone knows Number of the Beast. Root, major third, root, perfect fourth, root, major fifth. Perfect fifth. What's really awesome about this riff is that the Number of the Beast is about the devil, obviously, and that's a dark concept. So you would expect that riff, if the sonic landscape were going to match the content of the riff in terms of, the meaning, then you would expect like flat twos and minor thirds and tritones in this riff. But no, you get a very consonant major third, perfect fourth, and perfect fifth in that riff. So you have like the world's most evil song in theory, but it's crafted by using perfect and major intervals, making it like the least heavy metal thing ever. But yet, it works. Metal, I have a series called Major Metal. If you check the playlist, if you want to see some songs that actually use major keys or major chords, it's a really cool concept. I think when you think mostly of metal and rock as being minor or Phrygian or whatever, and in this case, we're using major intervals. I always thought that was really cool. So I just want to leave you with one more thing regarding riff construction, songwriting tips for metal. You have obviously just going with your gut, chromaticism. Chromaticism sounds great. There's nothing diatonic about that kind of move. It's just a half step. You wouldn't ever have an F and an F sharp in the same diatonic scale. But that would be something like Opeth would do, right? Opeth would break the rules. And I don't want this to turn into an Opeth video. I don't want this to be like a traditional harmonic analysis video. But just going with your gut, learning simple things, learning the layout of a minor scale. The other thing that's really cool, if you want to like really just kind of feel your way out on guitar, just take a chord and just move it around. Move it around the neck and see what sounds you can get, right? Because not everything can be seen super quick and super easy. So explore, experiment, take chances. I mean, I bet you when Kirk Hammett wrote Enter Sandman, he wasn't like, hey, let's write a blues style riff with a tritone and make it sound evil and heavy. I'm sure he was just noodling. He's probably sitting there just noodling in the studio, and he came up with that riff, and it's one of the best metal riffs of all time. So I think that covers this episode. If Chris is unsatisfied with this as it stands, let me know in the comments, buddy, and I will do even more. But I don't want to take all day to do this. I think I've made a lot of really good points. If anybody has anything they'd like to add, I can maybe do a part 2. Chris, if you want a part 2, you let me know. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.